Judges 7:9. That same night, the Lord said to him, arise, circle arise, and go down, circle go down, against the camp. So this is the camp of the army. Underline this, the rest of this sentence. For I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid, circle afraid, to go down, then go down to the camp with Purah, your servant. And you shall hear, circle shall hear, what they say. And afterward, underline this sentence, your hands will be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outposts of the armed men who were in the camp. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance. And their camels were without number, as the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. Then Gideon came. When Gideon came, behold, a man was telling his dream to his comrade next to him. And he said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian and came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and turned upside down so that the tent lay flat. And his comrade said to him, underline this sentence, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, circle Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God, circle God, God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. Have you ever wondered what your calling from God is? Have you ever wondered, why do I live another day? Have you ever wondered, if God has a will for my life, if God has a future for me, how would I discover that? Literally, for all of us, humans are different than any animal in the world, any insect in the world. Animals don't wonder, like, why am I here? They just say, where's food or where can I poop? If you have a dog, you know what I'm talking about. Insects, not even a worry for them. But you know, humans, me and you, we go, what's my value in living? And if there is a God and he has a calling on my life, how would I discover that? Gideon's gonna give us some principles that I hope when you leave today, that you realize how to discover God's will and ways of knowing that God is working in your life. Number one, if you got your notes, pull them out. They should be in your bulletin. If you don't have them and you're on Facebook right now, at the top of the comment section, there's a link. You can click on that link and my notes will drop down. Number one is this: God magnifies the disruption. God magnifies the disruption. Have you ever thought this? I talked a little bit about it last week. Have you ever thought this? Wow, it can't get any worse than this. Like, for sure, like, it's bad, but I know at least the government's not going to tell us how many people to have in our own home for Thanksgiving. And like, oh, it's bad, but you know, I mean, we have certain regulations and stuff, but at least the government hasn't like kept us from like being out past 10 as grown adults. Like, has there ever been a point in your life where you just go, okay, it's not going to get worse than this. We at least know this is the end. But then it goes, okay, but this is the worst. Okay, but it's not going to get worse than this for sure. It's like you feel heat and then it gets hotter and you're like, wow, it's definitely not going to get hotter than this. And all of a sudden the heat gets cranked up and you kind of go, God, why are things getting worse? Why are things getting worse? Why in the world, especially if I'm trying to follow you, do things get worse? Our society, is it stressed out? It's full of anxiety. And the reality is if I didn't trust God, I would be too. If I felt like my whole life was up to me to make happen, I would live in anxiety and depression every day of my life. So Gideon is going to be asked to go do something that's almost impossible without God, which is go down to hundreds of thousands of trained killers with you and 300 other guys. Some of them are farmers. This is going to be your little troop that's going to take on this Midianite army. So it's gone from pretty bad to, I'm going to ask you to go die. As bad as it can be. So God increases the disruption in Gideon's life. Once Gideon had gathered the Israelite army of 32,000, which we looked at a couple weeks ago, God sent 22,000 scared men home, then reduced the remaining 10,000 men down to 300 by drinking at a stream. So that's what we looked at last week. Gideon goes, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to gather a bunch of people. They're going to be awesome. He gets 32,000 guys to show up like, no way, 32,000. That's like a nice sized city. And God goes, tell all the scaredy guys to go home. And Gideon's like, oh, for sure, everybody's going to stay. 22,000 go back to their tents. He's left with 10,000 guys. He goes, that's kind of a lot still. And he goes, I want you to send everybody home except 300. He goes, we're going to get slaughtered. Like literally, we're going to be dead before morning. So things don't get better for Gideon. It doesn't like, oh, when I follow God, things are going to get better and they're going to get cleaner and it's going to be better and things are going to go my way. And now it's awesome. Now my life's great. It's like it gets worse and worse and every step is worse and worse and worse. He's following God and it's getting worse. How is that a calling from God? Why would I follow God when my life's getting worse? I'm going to tell you why. Because you leading your life without God is a dead end. But you following God, even into difficulty, is blessing. But in the moment, it doesn't feel that way. Let's look at it. Knowing they will get slaughtered by the massive Midianite army, Gideon is apprehensive about his calling from God. You ever been apprehensive about your calling from God? Where God goes, I want you to do that thing, and you're like, yeah, about that. I don't know if I'm really down with that. You ever been apprehensive about something you know God's calling you to do, and you're like, I don't know if that's going to work. That's Gideon. I want you to go down and take that army. He's like, what are you talking about? I can't do that. He's so scared he has to question God. Not only are his men overmatched by the size of the army, but he is overwhelmed by the size of his self-doubt. Are you crippled by self-doubt? Do you feel self-doubt in your mind like I'm not good looking enough, or I'm not athletic enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't know, if I even have anything to offer, really? I kind of feel just low about myself. Like I always function from a level of insecurity. Like the reason I am the way I am is that I just function out of insecurity. Like I'm always in self-protection mode. Like I don't function out of peace and a mission from God. I function out of insecurity and like always reflexive and defensive. Because I'm not sure if people will like me if they really knew me. Like I don't feel like I'm on a mission for God. I feel like I'm always insecure about everything. Well, you'd have good company with Gideon. He's in the most massive insecure moment of his whole entire life. Literally, he might not be alive by morning. But to his credit, he's still going to trust God in the massive disruption of his life. Ready? Here's our principle. God will often put believers in a situation where there is no doubt about who accomplished the victory. Woo! Here we go. Let me lay it out for you. Ready? There's the reason God turns up the heat in your life where God calls you to something and you're like, you get in the bucket and it's hot. You're like, ooh, that's hot. But it's not going to get hotter than this. And then God goes, whoa, this is hot. But I know it's not going to get worse than this. I guess that's getting hotter. I don't even know why I made that sound. But it's getting hotter. And you realize, wow, like this is blazing hot. I don't know if I'm going to survive. You know the reason God does that in your life and in my life is because he wants you to know that when he comes through for you, you know who gets the credit. Because if it's all on you and you can finish it and you can handle it, number one, you don't need faith in God because I got it handled. But even at the end, you kind of go, do you guys see how amazing I was in 2020? What a great year. I just flew right through. Financially, I was amazing. My marriage was fantastic. Dude, life was so great in 2020. Now, you know what? God keeps putting the screws to everything in 2020. Because it puts you and me to the test of like, man, who's running my life? 2020 has proven to you, you can't run your life, son. What more do you need? What more do you need than this year? That life without God is absolute chaos and anxiety and riots and anger and hatred and what else do you need? What else do you need to show you that society is not your way forward of peace? You have to have God in your life because things won't always go your way. They won't always go my way, but I know I can trust God. And when I know I can trust God, I can live in peace, even in disruption. Even when God turns a heat up in my life, I know I can live in peace. Because at the end of the day, God gets glory when he gets the work done through us. In the face of overwhelming odds, God doesn't lessen the risk for Gideon, but it rather increases the trust. Woo, listen. You know what? Sometimes what we think is this. Hey, I want you to go do that really difficult thing. And you're like, oh, God, that's so risky. Gideon could go die. And you know what God doesn't do? God doesn't say this. Oh, you know what? I changed my mind. We're going to make it a little bit easier. Or let's lessen the risk a little bit for you so that you don't get scared. You know what God does? He goes, I still want you to go do it. He doesn't lessen the risk. He doesn't tell Gideon, okay, the mission's off. He says, it's still the mission. I'm still calling you to do that, but I'm not going to lessen the risk. So think about it this way. God has led us to possibly a new home. We can have a new, beautiful home for our home family, and then the literally 250,000 people in our valley that don't know Jesus. We could have a home for them. But could God do all that work himself and miraculously just go, ding, building's done? Of course he could. God can do anything he wants. But why does he use me and you to get stuff done? Because it teaches us trust, and it teaches us at the end of it, God got it done through us, and we are glorifying God, saying, God, you did it. So here's oftentimes what we think. God goes, hey, I want you to give to that. Let's build out our new home. And you kind of go, you know what? I got another boat I got to buy. I told Johnny we were going to get another boat. So I can't give to that. God, but maybe next time. Because that's risky if I don't get that boat. And you know what? I just blew out the turbo on my Porsche. And you know, driving a Porsche without a turbo is like lame. So I said I was going to fix that. All the money that I was going to put into that can't go into the church or whatever. It's like, but here's the thing, God. Here's what I swear to you. You let me win the lottery, I'll give some to you. You let me win that like 200 million Powerball, I'm giving $50 to the church. That's a guarantee. So what we want is we know God's calling us, go, dude, let's get this done. Let's get this done. And you're like, we come up with an excuse financially or whatever. I can't give to the church because of X, Y, Z or whatever. We just come up with an excuse. It's not a good excuse. We go, God's going, this is your family. Take care of your church family. Take care of your own family and take care of your church family. And we kind of go, but I can't. But if it went my way, if I had an extreme amount of money, then I'd give some. So we want God to lessen the risk, we want God to make our walk of faith easier, basically not a walk of faith. We want God to take all the risk out when we do his will. But God says, nope, I'm telling you to go do that thing. And when you get there, I will bless you. But the blessing doesn't come on the front end because then it's not faith. You got to walk your walk of faith out, and then God meets you where he called you to, and then he blesses you here, not back here. God doesn't bless Gideon with the victory before he goes to war. But he's scared out of his mind. He wants God to take all the risk out. Hey, just do all the work yourself, God. God goes, no, it's not how I work. I work when you walk. Tattoo that to your face. I work when you walk. You want to be blessed? Yeah, I'd love to be blessed by God. Then honor God as you walk your walk out, and God will bless you as you go. You don't get everything on the front end and take all the risk out of following God. It doesn't work that way. Matters with your school, matters with your marriage, matters with your parenting, matters with your job. Do the hard work up front and God blesses the fruit. God doesn't give you the fruit before you go to work. Ready? Here's our principle. Your faith should never be smaller than the size of your God. Woo! Tweet that. Your faith should never be smaller than the size of your God. Ready? If you live in constant anxiety and insecurity about what's going on in our world, it's very possible that you're not trusting in the God that you think you know. Because if you really believe that God can do anything, even in difficulty, are you trusting him? Because if you're really trusting God, you won't live in constant anxiety about life. Because you're trusting in God. You believe God's got your back. You believe God's walking with you. If God's called you, he's with you. Even in the fire, God is with you. So even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, man, you're with me, God. Understand, your faith should never be smaller than the size of your God. If God has called you to it, he will see you through it. If God has called you to it, he will see you through it. Let me give you an example. Ready? Many of us go, hey, my marriage hasn't really done well in 2020. Be honest with you, it's like, man, we don't get along anymore. Used to be great, not so great anymore. We ended up being at home a lot together. And you know, being together is not good for a marriage. So, right? So we just been fighting a lot, and I'm thinking about, getting a divorce and whatever else. But God has called me as the head of my home to love my wife. And so now I'm thinking, I think divorce would just be easier, and we could just kind of move on, and maybe I married the wrong person or whatever. We make this scenario up in our head where God goes, I want you to love your wife. And we say, I'm not really interested in that because she doesn't talk, she's disrespectful, she's nagging, she always cuts me down. I'm not interested in taking a step towards the middle. I'm just gonna stay out here. And God goes, you want your marriage to work? I want my marriage to work. Then do the work, son. You're the leader, take a step to the middle and love your wife. Be gentle to her, encourage her, care for her, fill her emotional cup, be what she needs, not just what you want. You want your marriage to work? Yeah, I'd love my marriage to work. But we want God to do all the work. God, she's a problem, fix her. I mean, you're God, you know how jacked up she is, fix her. And I'm just gonna hang out over here and wait till you're done fixing. And then our marriage will be awesome, because I'm awesome already. So once she gets awesome, we'll be awesome together. No, man. Your marriage is jacked up because you're jacked up. And so the way you repair that isn't to go, wait for God to do something. God's already told you his will. Love and care for your wife and your family. Okay, so I'm gonna do that, and I'm kind of sketched out because we have a bad history together, but you'll be amazed how the miracle then happens because you're faithful in what God's already called you to do. You don't just wait back here going, there's no risk for me, I'm gonna let God all do it. Hey, God called you to risk yourself, make yourself vulnerable. Be the man God called you to be, and watch maybe God work to heal your marriage. Same thing as a woman, as a wife in the home. It's like, my husband's a jerk. There's been we've had some bad history together. And I'm not gonna make a move towards healing our marriage at all until he does something. And this is the status of most marriages. It's a standoff of who's gonna move to the middle. And God already told you, respect your husband. Respect your husband. Men respond to respect. When you're disrespectful verbally or whatever, it destroys the marriage that God has called you to build up. Instead of building it up, you tear it down with your mouth. And so, do you want your marriage to work? Man, I really want my marriage to work. I thought this was going to be it. I really want it to work. Okay, awesome. Then do what God called you to do. No, I'm gonna wait for you to work on him because he's a loser. So make him not a loser, and we will win. No, you as a woman of God, take your step to the middle. I love you, I respect you. I want our marriage to work. How can we move forward together? God's already called, what's God's calling? A healthy marriage. So make a step towards doing that, and you might be amazed that God will do a miracle in your husband's heart. Number one, God magnifies the disruption. It's oftentimes when you think, man, it's not going to get worse, it gets worse. Ready? Listen to me. It's very possible that our government will be telling us that we can't even leave our houses soon. Because oftentimes what happens is they ratchet up slowly. So they tell you, hey, you can't be out between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And we kind of go, it doesn't really affect me because I don't work at night, blah, blah. And all of a sudden it'll get more and more. Hey, when you come home from work, just stay in your house at 6. And then pretty soon it'll be all day. So I just want to make you aware, it's very possible things will get worse. Just when you think, it's not going to get worse than this. Oh no, it can definitely get worse. So here's my encouragement to you when it does, is trust God. Trust God. Don't freak out. Don't lose your mind. Trust God. God will guide us through difficulty, even when he turns up the heat. Trust God, and God will get us through. Number one, God magnifies the disruption. Number two, God strengthens for the disruption. So why would God turn up the heat? Because when you do the work of God, you'll be amazed how you have strength. When you start doing the work of God, you'll have the strength you didn't have back here. God will give you the strength to do the job, to heal your marriage, to start working on things, to become a better student. It's horrible to be online right now as a student. When you're staring at little boxes of paper, of floating heads. That's the worst way to learn ever. But guess what? As a student, don't tap out. It's more, you'd rather be in school with real people. But guess what? It'll challenge you to become a better student. Even difficulty can go, this really bites the way I'm learning, but let me have self-discipline as a student. Let me learn the stuff, even though it's the most difficult way to learn possible. So there's a point in disruption in all of our lives. But God will give us strength during the disruption when he guides us. That night, God told Gideon to attack the army as God had given them into his hand. So he has given hundreds of thousands of trained killers into Gideon's hand. And Gideon's like, I haven't even done anything. But God says, I've already given them into your hand before he's even done it. He just has to be faithful and walk it out. But God allows him one last reassurance if he is afraid. In recognition, he is called to an impossible task. So after he had tested God with food and a wool fleece twice, so Gideon's already tested God 3 times. Gideon tests God now here for the 4th time. Here's our principle. Sometimes God confirms a calling when a calling is questioned. You ever questioned your calling? What am I supposed to be doing? There will be many times in mercy, God might go, okay, I'm going to answer your question because I know it's a legitimate question. You're not trying to get out of it. You're trying to just say, God, is this really where you want me to go? Because there's a lot at stake and I want to make sure I'm not being stupid. So many times God might bring something from the side to encourage you to keep going that way. And that's what God does with Parah. What's interesting here is God goes, Gideon, you're on the mission I'm sending you to. Go down and defeat that army. And then the next sentence, God goes, but if you're scared, which I know you are, you little weenie, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to send your man Parah down here with you as your bodyguard. So if you run into some trouble in the dark, you got your guy with you here to help fight. And the second reality might be this. He shows up to the side of the camp. They're maybe sitting around a campfire. He's sitting in the pitch blackness way back in the shrubs or whatever. And he's listening to this conversation, a divine conversation between 2 soldiers about a dream a guy had. And then the other guy interprets his dream for Gideon. Like it's an encouragement to Gideon, but he's got Parah with him. Many times God will give you somebody else in your life to give you clarity about something that God's calling you to do. So it wasn't Parah's calling, it was Gideon's calling, but he sends Parah with him to go, hey, did you hear what I heard? Yeah, man, I want to encourage you that that's God's will. Go. Like I heard the same thing you do. I believe in God's calling in your life. It's not my calling, but I know God's calling you. So let me help you with this. Ready? If you don't have somebody in your life, a man or a woman in your life that can speak godly wisdom directly into your life, you are doing life wrong. If you can't think of somebody right now like, oh, that's a woman that can totally speak into my life, or that's a man that can speak into my life, and I trust them, if you don't have a trusting, godly man or woman in your life that they can just sit down and go, what the heck are you doing, son? What are you doing, lady? That's crazy. Like, that's not God's will. Or, man, I just really want to encourage you. That's totally what God wants. I can see that in your life. If you don't have this person in your life, that means you're just doing everything by yourself. You're making your own calls in your life going, I don't really even care. I don't even need anybody's input in my life. I don't need a para in my life. I'll just do whatever I want. Listen to me. The first step of a train wreck is when you go in a direction without any guidance. Because oftentimes God will bring you guidance in your life to help you get clarity. It's called discipleship at the end of the day. God then sends Gideon to go with Parah down to the Midianite camp at night as his bodyguard and as an affirmer of Gideon's calling. Despite being told beforehand what he will encounter, God already told him what was going to happen. Gideon goes anyway to see if the circumstances happen as God said it would. Woo! Ready? Pay attention. We're going to go to the deep end of the pool right when you're ready to have lunch. Okay? I need you to come back to me because this is massive. I'm going to lay down something here that literally can change your life if you apply it. All of us go, what's God's will in my life? If there's a God, what does he want me to do? How can I be blessed by God? All of us say that. Either in our minds or literally physically out loud. And one of the ways we often discern God's will is, do circumstances line up for me? Am I supposed to go to the school? Am I supposed to marry her? Am I supposed to be with this person? Am I supposed to get this job? Am I supposed to move to somewhere else? And we go, let me see if circumstances line up and I'll go that way. So watch. This is what happens with Gideon. He goes down close to the camp. He listens to guys telling the story, his dream, and the interpretation of it. So God lines up all these circumstances so Gideon just wanders into a random spot near the camp and the guys just happen to be talking about the dream. So God's aligning all these circumstances to encourage Gideon in his calling to God. And here's the key, ready? One of the clarifiers of a calling is a coordination of circumstances. One of the ways that we know where we're supposed to go is God, who controls all history, coordinates history so that when he calls us to something, we know the way to go because God has made a path for us. It's one of the ways you know. One of the ways you know you're supposed to take a job, or one of the ways you know you're supposed to marry somebody, or whatever. Like, God coordinates everything. He makes it happen. He made the dream be told right when Gideon was within earshot. That's God. That's the sovereignty of God. So watch, when God calls you to something, God will align the circumstances to help you get to your calling. But here's the other side of that coin. Ready? I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to flip over the circumstances coin, and some of you aren't going to like it. The other side of that coin is this. But circumstances alone doesn't confirm a calling. Woo, what am I saying, Pastor? Here's what I'm saying. Some of you guys are looking for circumstances as God's will. Oh, hey, I got it. There's a job opening. I hate my job here, and there's a job opening in Saskatchewan, which I can't even spell that, but there's a job opening there. Must be God's will, because I was just thinking about getting a new job. Wait a second. Did you pray about this? Does anybody speak wisdom in your life? Oh no, I just know it's God's will because the door opened. Ready? When it's God's will, he will coordinate circumstances to make sure you can get on your calling. Circumstances alone, though, doesn't mean it's God's will for sure. Here's what I mean by that. God says, don't move there. Don't move somewhere. I want you to stay here. But there's an opening, there's a house for sale somewhere where I want to live in Saskatchewan or whatever. And I just go, oh, it must be God's will. And I already know God said, don't move. All right, don't take a job there. Or, don't do this thing. I already know God said it, but I want to go there. And when there's a little opening or when circumstances seem like, oh, that must be where I want to go, I'm actually disobeying God when I go after something I want, even though circumstances are open. Let me give you another example. My marriage isn't working out. Dude, I think it'd be better if we just got divorced and we just moved on. Maybe we married the wrong people, whatever your excuse is. You're like, oh, my marriage ain't working out. And you just make up something to make it seem okay. Well, here's what happens oftentimes. Does God want our marriage to stay together? Yes. Okay, well, two people I know their Bible. You're like, I'm not sure. That's actually a really good question. Because if you're not happy, God wants us all to be happy. So yeah, Oprah said we should just move on. Right? So our culture says, hey, be happy. Oh, I'm not happy with you, I'm out. Hopefully I'll find somebody else that makes me happy, and I'm not happy with them either, and then I have to keep on going over here. So here's the point. Does God want my marriage to work out? Absolutely, right? But here's me. I go, I'm just really unhappy. So maybe it's God's will that I have somebody else as my wife. And all of a sudden, right when I was thinking about that, I went on Facebook and my old girlfriend that I really loved from high school hit me up on Facebook. I'm like, it must be God's will. God wants me to be happy, number one. We know that. And number two, all of a sudden, Chicklet, number one, shows up in my life again. She was my first real love, my first real girlfriend. And now, right when I'm like in the middle of like, I wonder if I should move on, here she just shows up in Facebook going, what's up, God? Let's have some drinks sometime. That's Chicklet number one. And so you automatically assume, here's my point, you automatically assume because circumstances are going a way that you want to go, it doesn't mean it's God's will. God wants you to stay in your marriage and make this thing work. God will bless you here. So do the hard work here. Just because circumstances are leading you in a way you want to go doesn't mean it's God's will just because circumstances lined up. Because God's calling is for me to make my marriage work, to love my wife. So my point is that when God calls you to something, he'll align circumstances to make it happen. But just because circumstances align when God isn't calling you doesn't mean it's time to go. Because sometimes God will throw a block in there and he doesn't want you to go in that area. He doesn't want you to leave. He doesn't want you to take a job. He doesn't want you to do those things. But just because some door opens up doesn't mean it's God opening it. That's why you got to have people speaking into your mind. Don't do that. Why would you leave? Why would you go there? Why would you take that job? You're going to blow your family apart. Why would you leave the church? Why would you do these things? But many times we don't listen to counsel because we just want to go do that other thing. And that's the first step to train wreck in your life is when you go, I don't really even care what you have to say or what the Bible has to say. I'm going to do what I want. And right here, Gideon is going to listen to God's sovereignty as he hears the story, the dream, and then he's going to get his calling confirmed. Ready? While one believer's calling isn't another believer's calling, Parah didn't have the same calling as Gideon. He was just going along to encourage that Gideon was truly called. It will often be confirmed by external affirmation. So again, I want you to know, do not go marry somebody if you're a Christian without having godly men and women speak into your life. Do not take a job without having godly men and women speak into your life about it. Do not move somewhere without having godly men and women speak into your life. Now, that offends us in America because we just think, hey, I can do what I want. But the point is that godly men and women who really are chasing after God's will in their life, oftentimes God uses other godly people to speak sense into us when we're deceived. Because we think circumstances are taking us that way and it's not even God. So other godly people speak in our life and go, dude, don't go down that path. God wants you here. Or God wants you to do this thing. Or God will encourage you to go do that thing, whatever it is. Maybe it is moving, maybe it's doing whatever. The point is that other godly people speak that truth into your life. Leads us to lastly, number 3, God prepares to end the disruption. Number 1, God magnifies the disruption. He makes it hotter instead of cooler. He makes it hotter and harder for Gideon. Number 2, God strengthens for the disruption. God will give you strength in the moment when he calls you to do it. And lastly, God prepares to end the disruption, number 3. Guess what? At some point, 2020 will be over. It could be a few years before 2020 ends. It's like the never-ending story of drama in our culture, right? It's just like one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. But guess what? At some point, God willing, this whole mess will have blown by. And here's what I want to encourage you with. You know what you want to say? Once this is all past us, once we have a cure for it or whatever, you want to say this: I followed God during 2020. What you don't want to say is this: I was waiting for the government to do something. I was waiting for my president to do something. I was waiting for, the CDC to come out with this something before I'm going to feel safe. I was waiting. What are you doing? God's here in the moment. Trust God here right now. Because after this is all blown over, you want to be able to say, that really stunk, but I trusted God. I had peace even in chaos. Just outside the camp, Gideon and Parah hear a soldier telling his dream to another soldier. The other soldier interprets the dream as imminent defeat by Gideon. Both the dream and interpretation are products of the sovereignty of God. And I want to encourage you with this. God is the orchestrator of history. Look at it. You're like, would God want evil in the world? God does not want evil in the world. If evil has happened to you, God did not produce evil into your life. God, however, allows a certain amount of evil in the world, but it always has a purpose. We view evil as purposeless. But when bad things happen, COVID happens, bad things happen in our life, we're taken advantage of, we lose our money, somebody steals from us or whatever, we view that as God's not in control. And that's actually not scriptural. God doesn't allow all evil, but he does allow some. And when that happens, the beauty of the God of the Bible, as opposed to anybody else's belief system, is that God is even able to bring good from bad. He's even able to bring blessing from evil. He's even able to bring life from death. All the years that the locusts have eaten, he's able to produce fruit. So why wouldn't you trust that God? When things are going like trash and everything's going in the toilet, don't just go, I give up. Run to Jesus. Because that's where you find hope. Because God is the orchestrator of history. He doesn't approve of everything that happens in history, but he's the orchestrator that things will end the way he wants them to end, in the glorious mystery and power of God. Everybody with me? Okay. Though God doesn't approve of all of mankind's evil choices, he allows some things to test faith and even brings good from evil, Romans 8:28. Believers can trust their heavenly Father. Ready? When God has called you forward, he has already gone ahead of you. Here's how you know the calling in your life. I'm thinking about doing this. Get godly counsel. If godly counsel is saying, don't do that, that's really dumb, then definitely check and see that might not be God's will. Maybe not right now, but maybe later it is. But let's check up right now. Because if God's called you to it, he will give you the strength to do it. If God's called you forward, he's gonna meet you there in the future. But you and I gotta walk it out and meet him there. And he'll give us the strength to get his work done in our lives.